We now begin chapter 10 of the book of Daniel, and as usual, I will recite the entire chapter, and then we will go back and look at some of the highlights. So Daniel chapter 10, starting at verse 1. In the 3rd year of Cyrus, king of Persia, a word was revealed to Daniel, who was named Belteshazzar. And the word was true, and it was a great conflict. And he understood the word, and had understanding of the vision. In those days I, Daniel, was mourning for 3 weeks. I ate no delicacies, no meat or wine entered my mouth, nor did I anoint myself at all, for the full 3 weeks. On the 24th day of the 1st month, as I was standing on the bank of the great river, that is, the Tigris, I lifted up my eyes and looked, and behold, a man clothed with linen, whose loins were belted with gold of Uphaz. His body was like beryl, his face like the appearance of lightning, his eyes like flaming torches, his arms and legs like the gleam of burnished bronze, and the sound of his words like the noise of a multitude. And I, Daniel, alone saw the vision, for the men who were with me did not see the vision. But a great trembling fell upon them, and they fled to hide themselves. So I was left alone and saw this great vision, and no strength was left in me. My radiant appearance was fearfully changed, and I retained no strength. Then I heard the sound of his words, and when I heard the sound of his words, I fell upon my face in a deep sleep, with my face to the ground. And behold, a hand touched me, and set me trembling on my hands and knees. And he said, O Daniel, man greatly beloved, give heed to the words that I speak to you, and stand upright, for now I have been sent to you. While he was speaking this word to me, I stood up trembling. Then he said to me, Fear not, Daniel, for from the first day that you set your mind to understand and humbled yourself before your God, your words have been heard, and I have come because of your words. The prince of the kingdom of Persia withstood me 21 days, but Michael, one of the chief princes, came to help me. So I left him there with the prince of the kingdom of Persia, and came to make you understand what is to befall your people in the latter days, for the vision is for the days yet to come. When he had spoken to me according to these words, I turned my face toward the ground and was speechless. And behold, one in the likeness of the sons of men touched my lips. Then I opened my mouth and spoke. I said to him who stood before me, O my Lord, by reason of the vision pains have come upon me, and I retain no strength. How can my Lord's servant talk with my Lord? For now no strength remains in me, and no breath is left in me. Again, one having the appearance of a man touched me and strengthened me. And he said, O man greatly beloved, fear not, peace be with you. Be strong and of good courage. And when he spoke to me, I was strengthened, and said, Let my Lord speak, for you have strengthened me. Then he said, Do you know why I have come to you? But now I will return to fight against the prince of Persia, and when I am through with him, behold, the prince of Greece will come. But I will tell you what is inscribed in the book of truth. There is none who contends by my side against these, except Michael, your prince. As we begin this commentary on chapter 10, it's important to note that chapters 10, 11, and 12 go together as they deal with the same vision that Daniel has, which is his last. Chapter 10 serves by way of introduction, chapter 11 sets forth the contents of the vision, and chapter 12 acts as an epilogue, giving further and hopeful instructions to Daniel. The year is 537 BC, which is the 3rd year of King Cyrus's reign after conquering Babylon. As we know from the book of Ezra, chapter 1, verses 1 to 4, Cyrus, in his 1st year, had decreed that Israel was free to return to Jerusalem and rebuild the temple. So what is Daniel still doing in pagan territory? Well, by this time, he is an old man, likely in his 80s or even 90s. Also, he continued to hold a high position in government, and could therefore still use his godly influence, especially through his prayers, visions, and wisdom. Which brings us now to verses 2 and 3, where Daniel is in mourning for 3 weeks. It may be for his pagan neighbors, but more likely because of the revelation given to him in chapter 9 of a further delay of 490 years before Israel would be restored, due to the unrepentant heart of the people. Daniel wanted further details concerning the events that would afflict Israel during this extended period of preparation. Already, for example, as the priest Ezra reports, even though the Jews had returned to Jerusalem, reconstruction of the temple was being opposed by the Samaritans. And that's in Ezra chapter 4, verses 4 and 5. Notice again how Daniel's prayer is persistent, zealous, and combined with fasting. This virtue of detachment, as we discussed in chapter 1, serves Daniel well in a land of temptation, enabling him to separate from distractions to more fully serve God. While he is in prayer, Daniel sees a brilliant angel dressed in a priestly vestment, which causes Daniel to lose all strength and fall to the ground in a deep sleep. The angel has to strengthen Daniel by touching him so that he can stand up and speak. This is one of only several ways set forth in Scripture that angels help us. It was similar to how an angel strengthened Jesus in his great struggle in the Garden of Gethsemane, and the prophet Elijah when he was sinking into despair in 1 Kings chapter 19, verses 3 to 7. This was after his great triumph against the 450 prophets of Baal on Mount Carmel. But now, because he was being chased by Jezebel, he was falling into depression. Quote, Elijah was afraid and ran for his life, and when he came to Beersheba in Judah, he left his servants there, while he himself went a day's journey into the desert. He came to a broom tree, sat down under it, and prayed that he might die. Quote, I have had enough, Lord, he said. Take my life. I am no better than my ancestors. Then he lay down under the tree and fell asleep. All at once an angel touched him and said, Get up and eat. He looked around, and there by his head was a cake of bread baked over hot coals, and a jar of water. He ate and drank, and then lay down again. The angel of the Lord came back a second time and touched him and said, Get up and eat, for the journey is too much for you. So he got up and ate and drank. Strengthened by that food, he traveled 40 days and 40 nights until he reached Horeb, the mountain of God. End of quote. Other ways angels assist us include providing protection, as we saw in chapter 3 of Daniel with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the fiery furnace, and Daniel in the lion's den. As Psalm 34 verse 7 states, quote, The angel of the Lord encamps all around those who fear him and delivers them. End of quote. Further, angels guide us, for example, in the book of Tobit, where Raphael acts as a guide to Tobiah in his journey to Sarah, whom he will marry, and in the book of Exodus chapter 23, verses 20 to 23, where God sends an angel to march ahead of the people in the pillar of fire and cloud as they head towards the promised land. Angels also bring us God's message. This is depicted here in the book of Daniel, and with the Blessed Virgin Mary in the Annunciation, and Zechariah regarding the birth of John the Baptist. Finally, angels assist us at our death, as seen in Luke chapter 16, verse 22, when the poor man Lazarus is carried by an angel to Abraham's bosom. Now back to our story. An angel reveals to Daniel that from, quote, the first day that you set your mind to understand and humbled yourself before your God, your words have been heard, and I have come because of your words. End of quote. Reminding us again of the importance of prayer and the attitude we bring to it. In the book of Isaiah, God says through the prophet, and to all of us, quote, This is the one I esteem, he who is humble and contrite of heart, and trembles at my word." End of quote. We now come to a difficult and contested part of the chapter. In verse 13, the angel speaks of being hindered by the prince of the kingdom of Persia for 21 days until Michael, one of the chief princes, came to assist him, and that, in verse 20, he would return after giving Daniel the message to fight against the prince of Persia and the prince of Greece. What are we to make of these verses? There are basically two lines of interpretation. The first understands that these princes are good angels who have been assigned by God as guardians over particular nations. The struggle between the angels is based on the different merits or demerits of the nations, and that each angel is seeking the best spiritual good of that people. So, for example, the guardian angel of Persia would want the Jews who knew the one living God of Israel to remain in Persia, helping the spiritually impoverished pagans, whereas the guardian angel of Israel, that is Michael, would desire the Israelites to return to Jerusalem and rebuild the temple. A contrary interpretation would see the princes of Persia and Greece as evil angels, so that a great cosmic battle is taking place. This goes back to the theme of divine contest discussed in our commentary on chapter 1 regarding the transfer by Belshazzar of sacred vessels from the temple in Jerusalem to the temple of Babylon's chief god, Marduk. Such a view would highlight that behind world history, especially the evils of wars and genocides, famine and poverty, there exists spiritual warfare in the heavenly realms. In the book of Daniel, all four pagan nations of Babylon, Persia, Greece, and Rome were opposed to Israel and exercised control over the people of God that caused terrible evils. Now, in chapter 10, verses 13 and 14, the prince of Persia tries to prevent God's message from reaching the prophet, so that Daniel cannot act on it and carry out God's will. In verse 19, the angel says to Daniel, quote, "O man greatly beloved, fear not, peace be with you. Be strong and of good courage." End of quote. Once again, the words "greatly beloved" are how Daniel is described, much like the angel Gabriel referring to Mary as highly favored one, or full of grace, or God calling David a man after my own heart. Further, as the angel tells Daniel, "Fear not," so Gabriel tells Mary, "Be not afraid." Chapter 10 concludes by the angel telling Daniel that when he returns after fighting the prince of Persia, he will reveal what is inscribed in the, quote, "book of truth," end of quote. This book is likely the contents of chapter 11, detailing the vision and its interpretation. That is, future historical events during the kingdom of Greece, and especially the wicked reign of Antiochus Epiphanes IV and his oppression of Israel. So, in verse 2 of chapter 11, the angel begins, quote, "And now I will show you the truth," end of quote. Before proceeding with the vision, one important lesson can be gleaned from this short introduction in chapter 10, that is, to make it personal. Yes, the cosmic battle between good and evil operates through government structures and political institutions that underlie human history, but it also operates in our hearts. So we observe Daniel personally involved in struggling through his prayer and fasting, desiring to know the future suffering of his people, and willing to sacrifice to gain wisdom, continuing to pray for 21 days, while, unknown to him, the angel sent to enlighten Daniel was himself caught in a great struggle, being hindered by opposing forces for the same number of days. Could Daniel's prayer actually assist in this great struggle? The comments of St. Paul here are helpful. This is 2 Corinthians chapter 10, verses 3 to 5. Quote, "For though we live in the world, we do not wage war as the world does. The weapons we fight with are not weapons of the world. On the contrary, they have divine power to demolish strongholds. We demolish arguments and every pretension that sets itself up against the knowledge of God, and we take captive every thought to make it obedient to Christ." End of quote. Like Daniel, we are called to stay faithful to God by persevering in prayer, whatever the opposition, realizing what may be happening on a deeper cosmic scale. In the book of Job, for example, the entire premises of his testing was the result of a spiritual duel. Satan presents himself before the Lord and challenges not only Job's loyalty, but God's providence. The contest is on, as Satan is given permission to afflict Job, his family, and possessions. By the end of the story, God's providence and power are manifested, and Job's righteousness greatly rewarded. So, we must stay in the contest, active in our faith and the new evangelization, using all the spiritual resources at our disposal. As St. Paul details in 2 Corinthians chapter 6, verse 5, in purity, understanding, patience, and kindness, in the Holy Spirit and in sincere love, in truthful speech and in the power of God, with weapons of righteousness in the right hand and in the left, through glory and dishonor, bad report and good report, genuine, yet regarded as impostors, known, yet regarded as unknown, dying, and yet we live on, beaten, and yet not killed, sorrowful, yet always rejoicing, poor, yet making many rich, having nothing, and yet possessing everything." End of quote. In the next podcast, we will look at chapter 11 and the contents of this vision as explained by the angel, and then conclude with chapter 12's important and hopeful insights.